Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 102.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Welcome to the second full episode of Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast. We're here with a full show today. We'll kick it off with a introduction to the Wi-Fi question of the day with Lee Badman, followed up by an interview I did with Jerry Olla on using SDR, a software-defined radio, as an RF jammer, followed by a little 10 talk. We stripped out the audio from a 10 talk from one of the WLPC conferences and put it in here, a talk on deploying Wi-Fi networks in the real world by Jason Hintersteiner. And then a little bit from Eddie Forero on Bad-Fi about why to or not to put APs in hallways. That's the show coming up for you. Stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy today's episode.
Wi-Fi question of the day with Lee Badman.
Well, welcome to Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast. Today I'm with Lee Badman. Lee, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Keith.
We're starting off almost a relaunch, but kind of a restart of the Wireless LAN Weekly podcast, renaming it the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast. And it's kind of a variety show with different little subsections. One of those subsections we wanted to add was with you, talking about Wi-Fi Q, Wi-Fi question of the day. It's been very successful, so I thought I'd interview you and find out about where it came from, what it's doing, what your plans are for it in the future.
Well, that's a lot of questions. So let me take them in order if I can here. So,
I'll ask them again in shorter order. I was just kind of setting it up. So first, who are you and where you work? What do you do?
Well, I am Lee Badman. I'm a wireless network architect for Syracuse University. I'm a private consultant with my own little company. I'm a busy blogger and writer. I'm an adjunct faculty at the university. I'm a dad and a husband and all of that. And like you,
in your spare time.
Like you, I try to stay busy. I was going to say the spare time kind of all just blends into the other stuff, and that's okay. It's the way I like it.
Well, I'm impressed. You get a lot done. And you're a ham operator, too. And you used to work for the city or a village, whatever you have back there.
Oh, yeah. I used to be the deputy mayor of our small village. So
very successful in all of those. I'm impressed. What was the impetus to start the Wi-Fi question?
Well, I went from being a Twitter skeptic to being a Twitter believer. That's its own story. But once I got converted, I realized that there is a lot of not so much social going on this social network with wireless people. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be nice to get people talking, maybe not adversarially. I think you know what I'm trying to say there that I'm fumbling with. Get people talking in a non-threatening way, sharing opinions and all of that on one topic a day, like a little mini networking thing. And I kind of threw it out there and a couple days in a row, and it's stuck, and people actually seem to like it, and that was the impetus of it.
Well, it's been extremely successful with hundreds and hundreds of responses. So when do you do this Wi-Fi Q?
I do it every day in the morning before I go to work on weekdays, and then even if I don't go to work on the days off I've kind of committed to it, and usually in the morning Eastern time, somewhere around 6 o'clock in the morning, U.S. Eastern time.
Yeah, that's why I'm always so late. You're like 2 hours ahead, and I get up 2 hours after that. But when I'm traveling internationally, I get a chance to be one of the first to respond. So
I'm glad you brought that up.
6 a.m. is good.
It is kind of neat. I'm glad you brought the international thing up. It is kind of nice to see the answers roll across the planet, because a lot of times it'll be the European people will be the among the first answerers if it's a good question and they're interested, and then you kind of watch it roll across the time zones as people wake up in the U.S. all the way through the day. So if it's a good question and you get a lot of answers and a lot of people involved, you really do get a sense for the time zone thing going on right before your eyes.
That's kind of a fun thing to watch. Do you know, is anyone curating this group and saving it somehow?
I know a couple of people have done different things with it because they've showed me my stats and all of that. On some documentation and some data gathering, I am very, very methodical. On this, I know it's going to sound bad, but I just really haven't cared so much other than knowing that a lot of people like it, and that's good enough for me. When I have seen the statistics, it's pretty fascinating. I can't say off the top of my head where those stats are being gathered and all of that, but I know a couple of different people, for whatever reason, are tracking it. When they play it back to me, it is utterly fascinating. So maybe sometime, back to your comment about free time, if I ever get any, maybe I'll take more of an interest in seeing just how far it's gone. But I have absolutely no doubt that, there's been certainly hundreds of people throughout the, going on 2 years that it's been going that have been involved, and just thousands and thousands of direct answers and then sub conversations that have spun off, which is great. So, I mean, it's not not a concrete answer, but it's the best I've got for that.
So what's your process of coming up with all these questions?
That's a great question in itself. I'm in different Slack groups, and every now and then on Twitter itself, I'll remind people, I could use some help with this. If you've got something you want asked, I'll be more than happy to channel it out there to the masses. So I get some good input. Some weeks, 4 out of 5 questions I ask actually came from other people, and I just have the challenge of shaping them so they fit and making them maybe a little better formatted than they came to me. And it's great when people send those my way because it's less I have to think about. Other times, if I've got just a brain full, sometimes I'll schedule out a week or two in advance. I'll cheat a little bit so they auto post every morning. And sometimes I just have a drought, and it's just last minute. Something will hit me as I'm getting ready to put my dogs outside for the morning and get in the shower. So it's a combination of what did I see the day before that I can turn into a question, or what did I hear a lively conversation about in some channel. I'll shape that into my own question and play it out there to the world, or take questions from other people.
So what's your recommended way if someone has a question they'd like added to the queue? How should they get into contact with you?
Well, for those who I share, again, Slack groups and all of that, the relationships tend to be real informal, and they'll just say, hey, that would make a good Wi-Fi queue, and I'll make note of that and try to work it in. For people who don't know me that well and I don't cross paths with in any other way but Twitter, I would say DM me. And if you can't because I don't follow, just say, hey, follow me, you knucklehead, so I can DM you. And I'll be more than happy to email. A lot of people know my email address. It's just basically any way that you know of to get to me, with Twitter always is the last resort.
And Twitter, you're at Wired Knot.
At Wired Knot. It's the only handle I have. Yep.
Very good. So looking forward, future plans for Wi-Fi Q?
Well, nothing formal, nothing formally changing. No need to reinvent what's working. Probably I'll go until I'm exhausted of doing it, but I don't see that happening anytime soon. And then when I finally get to that point, maybe I'll either retire it and go out on top, as they say, or see if somebody else wants a hand in doing it, or retool when the time comes. But for right now, as far as I can see, just keep on going till it kind of loses, till it loses interest of the community. It's for the community. I won't say I don't get anything out of it, but it's as much for other people as it is for me. And, when the interest dries up, we'll evaluate it then.
Well, from my standpoint, it's one of those things I actually look forward to looking at every morning. So,
it's great to hear. Thank you.
What we'd like to see here on the moving forward on the podcast is to have a little subsection, just a couple minutes to have you go through, and when you come across a popular or controversial or highly interactive question, to just record a little podcast, a little blurb about what the question was and what the answers were. Can you do that for us?
Oh, absolutely. Some are definitely more involved and better received than others. Some of them kind of fall flat, but thankfully that's not very often. So there's no shortage of really active questions to talk about.
And some of them I want to answer, and some of them I don't want to answer. So I guess that makes it a good question.
Yeah, I follow you.
For a variety of reasons.
Yep.
Just a final question here. If you could change anything in 802.11 protocol, what would you change?
It would absolutely change the top of my list right this second. I would say it's the way RSSI is shown across different clients, instead of manufacturers having the freedom to write it any way they want. So, I have 2 bars and you have 4, but underneath it's potentially the same signal. I think that's pretty goofy and kind of, creates a bunch of problems, both for people who get wireless and for people who don't.
I think that's a very good answer. My first thought was, why does the Wi-Fi Alliance? I can understand why IEEE has so many options, but why the Wi-Fi Alliance didn't lock things down a little more, especially on the client side. Just as an aside, last week I was in DC with Wi-Fi Now, and the president CEO of Wi-Fi Alliance was presenting, and during the Q&A, I asked a very simple question, like, when are you going to test client roaming? And his answer was, you'll love this, real soon now.
Yeah, there you go.
But he did come back and say, I mean in months, not in years. So it's been, 15 years we haven't had any client roaming testing, so hopefully within months we might get some.
Yeah, no doubt. It'll be a good thing when it comes.
We would like that. Well, Lee, thank you for your time today, and we'll get this up, and then we're glad to be sharing more of your Wi-Fi Q little blurbs in the future. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me.
WLAN interview. Getting to know the leaders, movers, and shakers in the wireless LAN world.
Okay, this is recording with Jerry Olla. How are you supposed to say that anyway?
Definitely not. Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, it looks like that.
It
it
looks like a lot of things.
I was trying to be
I've
like
heard
Fernay always calls you by.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's the Spanish pronunciation of it.
Well,
it's actually
Spanish.
Italian, so I guess the Italian pronunciation is Olla.
Olla. Well, that's so much easier for me to say. So
Anyway,
we're here. We happen to be at an Ethiopian restaurant in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's a good place to talk about Wi-Fi.
Good place to talk about Wi-Fi. Yeah. Okay. At WPC in Phoenix, we had a couple hands-on sessions. One of the maker sessions was a Hack RF.
Yep.
And the other was, thanks to you, the Odroid, and it was fantastic. Loved it.
Love doing it. Yeah,
but you've since done something else with your Hack RF.
Yeah.
And I saw it, and I thought it would make a great episode for the podcast. I'll take a couple of pictures. We'll put up on the podcast as well. But first of all, tell us what you did with the Hack RF, and what do we have here in front of us now?
So, yeah, I took the Hack RF, took it apart, of course. That's the first thing, us geeks like to do with, new electronics, right? Hopefully I'm not the only one. But, yeah, so did a little research, and ultimately what I was trying to accomplish was creating a portable way of using the Hack RF without needing to connect it to my laptop, mainly for the sake of kind of using it as a demoing device for spectrum analysis and being able to show the spectrum utilization when the HackRF was transmitting on certain frequencies. So a signal generator, right? So being able to demonstrate the spectrum analysis capabilities like in Ekahau and other tools that you can do spectrum analysis on and show channel utilization and how it affects transmissions and the receiving side of those signals.
So one of the HackRF exercises we did at WOPC was to turn the HackRF into listening to FM radio. We listened to a variety of things we could hear.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing we did was Bluetooth, so we could make it transmit a Bluetooth BLE signal. And you're saying you've done with the HackRF is loaded software on it that will allow it to generate a jammer?
Yeah, essentially kind of a custom firmware for, that has a few capabilities, one of those being a signal generator or a jammer, if you will.
Signal generator, yes. We don't want to use the jammer
That's
word.
right.
That sounds
we don't want to
bad.
use that bad word. So, we'll call it a signal generator, and you can generate signals on frequencies that the HackRF is capable of generating signals on, which is, 10 megahertz all the way up to 6 gigahertz, I believe.
So there's a company up in Seattle called Nuts About Nets,
Mm-hmm.
and they take a regular Wi-Fi chip and they turn it into a signal generator, but it generates a Wi-Fi look. You can see either a CCK curve or an OFDM curve, but it kind of breaks the way Wi-Fi works and just transmits this straight curve. And then on a spectrum analyzer, you can see it. So they made that as a signal generator to test your spectrum analyzer. What you're saying here is you made a signal generator with a HackRF to test like Ekahau spectrum analyzer, so you can see it there.
That's right.
What I see in front of me here is looks like you have a little box. That box came with the PortaPack?
With the PortaPack, yeah. So that's the
And
accessory there that adds the screen, the buttons, and everything.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a really big iPod.
Yeah,
with
exactly.
a little
yeah.
thumb wheel. It came
That's
with
a good way
a
to think of it.
little video screen as well.
Yep. Touch screen too. Yep.
Oh, touchscreen as
Yeah.
well. And then you strapped a battery to the bottom of it, so now it's a very portable little device.
Yeah,
Great.
and the
Okay, so
same battery that we used for the Maker Session, the Odroid Maker Session.
good combination.
Yeah.
And right now you have it set up in this jammer mode, and we'll add this. I'm just going to take a picture of it while we're sitting, so you can see what it looks like, and we'll share this with the audience. So, right now it's a nice little view. So, tell me what this does now. So you have it. It's showing a sweep 10, looks like 10 kilohertz. It's a preset and a hop time and a range. What are those?
Yeah, so you've got a few options on here. So the type of kind of signal generation or jamming that you're doing here, there's 3 different modes: FSK, tone, sweep. So it kind of generates different signatures. Is essentially what we see on the spectrum analysis using those different types. But yeah, then you can configure the settings between the speed of the signal that's being generated as well as the presets. You can define different presets for things like specific maybe WLAN frequencies that you're wanting to show that on a spectrum analyzer, or that your spectrum analyzer is monitoring.
So is this software like some pack you downloaded specifically for the HackRF?
Yeah, so the custom firmware that I use, there's a specific one for the PortaPack, but this one is kind of builds upon that. It's called the Havoc firmware, this custom firmware for the PortaPack that works specifically with the PortaPack and the HackRF
So you
hardware.
bought the additional PortaPack to go with your HackRF, and then you downloaded an extra image and pushed down to the HackRF to run this. Okay?
Exactly.
It has a little antenna on top. That's a 2.4 antenna, I'm assuming.
Yeah, exactly. This is a pretty low gain one. Obviously, you could amplify that signal a little more with a larger antenna on there.
Or
but,
directional, perhaps.
Sure.
Depends on what you want to do.
Yep. So pretty versatile that way.
And so you set this up and configured it using this Havoc firmware. And now when you use it on if you had a spectrum analyzer running, you could push this. What's kind of the shape that it shows on the spectrum analyzer?
Yeah, so it's pretty unique. It's not something that I've seen in there. It's essentially using the HackRF's capability of what kind of I guess chunks. I'm not real familiar with the technology as far as what its limitations are or capabilities are, but in the spectrum analysis you can kind of see that, right? So you can see it's transmitting on a certain section of frequency at a time, and then moving, kind of continuing to sweep across that range of.
So what kind of duty cycle
subcarriers.
does it show? If let's say we're in either MetaGeek or Ekahau spectrum analyzer, and we set it down to the 5-second range, so it's only showing the last 5 seconds worth of data? What kind of?
Yeah, so if you're looking at a specific channel, since it's kind of constantly sweeping across those, I guess, subcarriers in that channel, it'll show a utilization at about 60% or so is what I've seen. But, as far as decoding transmissions and stuff like that, it's preventing. So like in Akahau, for example, the beacons will stop being received by Akahau because of the jamming across the entire channel.
So
or those
that
subcarriers.
signal must be above energy detect level in order to stop the Wi-Fi.
Yep.
So
exactly.
do you tell it how loud to transmit, what its transmit power is?
That's a good question. No, there's no setting to kind of set that. So it just must be transmitting at full power.
But on your spec and, do you actually at what level does it show if this is sitting at the same table?
Yes. Obviously it depends on the proximity of it to it, but when I've transmitted within like a few feet away from the spectrum analyzer, it's showing. We could pull it up here and see, but I think it's more around like the 10 to 20 dB kind of range.
Oh,
yeah,
really
so
loud.
It's real loud. Yeah,
Okay.
It depends on the antenna too that's connected. This is a lower gain antenna, so probably not as loud. But yeah, I think you're going to see it probably.
So when
around 20.
you say you can have this sweep across the 2.4 to 2.5 region, does it basically knock all the Wi-Fi off along the way?
Yeah.
Quite useful to have at certain times.
For demonstration purposes, of course.
Of course,
yeah.
yes. Good. So can we get the URL and we'll add it to the notes of this podcast interview, and we'll add some pictures and put some URLs. And about how long did it take you to go through the process of getting this prepared and ready for?
Pretty straightforward. There's no soldering or anything like that required. You take apart a couple screws, take out the hack RF from its casing, and there's this is a bolt-on kind of module thing where it just has the connections that are made that are very seamless, and then you put a couple of screws, put it in its case, and then really the time-consuming part, I guess, is getting the firmware downloaded and flashed onto the hack RF board.
You wouldn't happen to have any instructions on how to do that, would you?
Yeah, we'll link to all that. So I can give
wonderful.
you the link to the PortaPack and to the hack RF firmware, the Havoc firmware. Yeah.
Great. Well, any other new projects you're working on? We took your Odroid and turned it into a maker session. We had the hack RF, and you've now turned the hack RF into a nice signal generator that can wreak havoc basically on Wi-Fi. What's next for you on your hacking journey?
Yeah, you never know. There's all sorts of gadgets out there, right? So I try to keep my eye out on what options are available. Yeah, nothing on the radar right now, but I'm sure something will pop up soon enough, and I'll get really focused on that for a while, and then move on to something else. Right?
Well, I got a PortaPack, and so now I just have to put it together and make it work. Looks like a great additional tool to have in a Wireless LAN Professionals toolkit.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, Jerry.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Thanks for having me on.
10 Talks.
So I want to welcome you all this morning to this morning's meeting of Antennas Anonymous. Hi, my name's Jason. Hi, Jason. Thank you. I'm a Wi-Fi engineer. And in deference to Eddie, it's been 3 days since my last deployment of BadFi.
It gets better.
So, this morning I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about deploying in the real world, right? And there's the theory and then there's the practice. The first step in any 12-step program is admitting you have a problem. So I'm going to admit that we are powerless as Wi-Fi engineers to really deploy in the right way. And where does it start? It starts with the customers. They lack understanding of RF. They lack understanding of how Wi-Fi works. Most of my customers lack understanding about how networking works. They got conflicting priorities. Aesthetics, how many of you have dealt with, you can't put the AP there. Aesthetics, yep, a whole bunch of you. Budget, time, right? Oh yeah, we're ready to order, give me 700 APs by next week. And then very poor articulation of requirements and constraints. Anybody in the room see the movie Mallrats? Probably remember this quote. If you haven't, go see it, great Kevin Smith movie. But it's not just the customers that are our problem. It's us as well. We're an arrogant group of Wi-Fi engineers, aren't we? I know I've been called that probably by several of you, actually, but we are highly trained people in our craft. And we've been doing this forever, some of us longer than others, but we've been doing it forever, and we know better than everybody else how it's supposed to be done. We're also biased. We choose the vendor equipment we prefer, or in some of our cases, the vendor equipment of the people we work for. We don't always choose the vendor equipment that's actually most appropriate for the job. And I've certainly worked on a wide variety of cases where certain vendors are more appropriate than other vendors. We also have commercial pressure to sell more versus selling what's right. And we also cheat. We take shortcuts, especially if we're not getting paid. The fault, dear Brutus, to bastardize my Caesar, my William Shakespeare, is not in our customers, but in ourselves that we deploy bad fi. So let's go through the steps that we normally go through, right? And that all the books, the CWNA and all the books that David and David have written, right, tell us how we should do design and how we should deploy. So the first step is to gather requirements and constraints. Now, I'm a systems engineer by background and training, so I'm a huge one on gathering requirements and constraints. But this is really, really hard. It's really hard to get this right. Because requirements are not static, they are fluid. The requirements often change during the project. I don't know how many of you have worked on surveillance systems and such, but I have yet to work on a surveillance project where people are mounting cameras, where they are not increasing the number of cameras while you're doing the design. We've yet to work on one. Daniel knows this very well. How are the requirements actually changing over the life of the network? Right? Our networks are 5 years out, right? What's the iPhone 10 going to do to this network? I don't know what the iPhone 10 looks like, but I know it's going to suck down a hell of a lot more data, and I know there's going to be a hell of a lot more of them. Many requirements are unstated or assumed. How many people in their designs make sure that there's excellent coverage in the bathrooms? Show of hands. All right, a few of you. Keep them up if you've ever actually explicitly been told to do so in an RFP or a spec or by a customer. Okay, wow, okay, most of you, because I've never been told that. I always put good coverage in the bathroom, so I've never actually gotten that in a spec. Customer doesn't always know things like, what's the building made out of? Right? And they sometimes don't even know how the network's going to be used. Right? What number and types of devices, what kind of applications, they often don't know. But okay, we gather what requirements we can, we go next, perform a predictive design. And in deference to the Twitter discussion this morning, it's not a survey, it's a design. But predictive modeling is an oversimplification. We oversimplify the environment because we guess at the types of walls. We often don't draw in everything, like bathrooms and closets and other kind of small features. We're guessing at the absorption and reflectivity on each band. We don't account for things in the actual environment, like furniture or appliances or mirrors or big bags of water walking around. What about external interference, right? Can't do that in a predictive model. We also oversimplify our deployment constraints. Can wiring actually be run to where we plop down those APs on the model? Will the installer actually deploy based on your specs? Garbage in, garbage out with a model. But okay, we don't want to rely on models. We want to perform a site survey. We want to go to the site and take measurements, measure the RF through walls. Keith, I know you got a really good gig with the Segway and you get people to pay you to do this all the time. Unfortunately, I think you're the exception. This isn't commonly done, especially in SMB where I work, small medium business, because the survey doesn't happen if nobody wants to pay for it. There are also installer limitations, especially as a device manufacturer, right? We're not the ones doing the installations, our customers are. So you have to rely on them to do a lot of this work. Do they have the right tools? Do they actually know how to use the tools, even if they have the right tools? And when they do a walkthrough, it's often to discover basics, like where the telco closets are and where I can actually run cabling, not how the RF is going to propagate. All right, so we've done our site survey, maybe, perform the installation, right? Hopefully they're deploying to spec, but does the installer cut corners and move your APs? I know I've heard several instances of that. Does the installer actually follow your carefully planned channel and transmit power scheme when they configure the equipment? Cabling, can wiring be run? Are your cables actually validated? Are your connectors properly seated? And then your environment, has it changed since the design of the survey was done? All right, let's go back in and validate and assess where we are. Again, unfortunately, this isn't commonly done. It's certainly not commonly done rigorously. Again, it won't get done if nobody pays for it. And often they're in a rush to finish the job, especially on new construction. where, the construction's already delayed, so now they're piling in the Wi-Fi at the very last minute. Again, you have installer limitations. Are the tools available? Do they know how to use them? Right? And when they do any testing, it's testing for basics. Can I get out to the internet? Do I actually have just any coverage at all in certain sections? And it's a spot check. It's not rigorous. And if there is a problem, what are they doing about it? So what can we do as Wi-Fi engineers? Where's Devin? Devin in the room? This one's for him. We can just place the APs randomly and let RM just figure it all out for us. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a competitor's. That's a competitor's slogan. I can't use that. We could blame it on all those ill-defined multi-user MIMO algorithms, right? That hot mess that's multi-user MIMO. Better yet, we'll just wait until 802.1x comes out and retire to Lee Badman's farm to go after a simpler life. Yeah, let's not do any of those things. So what do? We do the best we can. We standardize as much as possible. We pick out our set of preferred equipment, our APs, our switches, our routers, our controllers, right, for particular applications, but then we have to be flexible and actually adapt them to whatever requirements we actually know about. We also try to build a robust design, right? We design to those unstated requirements. We follow best practices, and we build in some margin and some excess capacity. And we also keep learning and refining our craft, which is why conferences like this are great. Failure is not an option. As a field engineer, I've got to figure out how to make it work, even with a lack of requirements, a lack of data, a lack of survey stuff, installers who are in way over their heads. Yeah, I deal with this stuff on a day-to-day basis. But failure is not an option, so we have to figure out how to make it work despite all of those things. So I'm going to close with a Wi-Fi engineer's serenity prayer. Gods of Wi-Fi, grant me this serenity to accept the things I cannot change, lack of requirements, lack of budget, lack of time, the courage to change the things I can, following best practices, following standards, following a robust design principles, and the wisdom to know the difference, and also the wisdom not to slap the customer across the face, because failure is not an option. We make the Wi-Fi work as best we can no matter what. Thank you.
Bad Fi Minute with Eddie Forero. Bad Wi-Fi installations drive you crazy? You might just want to skip ahead a couple of minutes. You've been warned.
Today on your Bad Fi Minute, APs in the hallways, with me, Eddie Forero from badfi.com. So APs in the hallway, the bane of hospitality. I mean, how many times have you been in a hotel with Bad Fi only to see that all the APs are in the hallways lined up like they're Oompa Loompas on their way to the candy mines? Unfortunately, this is quite common. So, what's the deal with APs in the hallways? Unless you've designed for this specifically with, let's say, directional antennas and proper AP placement, the biggest problem here is that RF, much like water, takes a path of least resistance, right? So an AP in the hallway will always be loud and clear up and down that hallway, but not so much in the rooms themselves. Maybe the room they're just outside of, but that's about it. So the first rule of Fi Club, yep, I just did that, is place the RF where your clients are. So are your clients congregating in the hallways to watch Netflix? I doubt it. So if at all possible, place APs within the rooms where your clients actually are. So to someone that does not understand how RF propagates, it makes practical sense as well as economic sense to place APs in the hallways because it seems logical that it will spread among all the rooms. Also, you need less APs. But the truth is the opposite. You've essentially created what I like to call a Wi-Fi Hadron Collider, where all the APs are loud and proud and can easily hear each other. So there's almost no way to get channel reuse, especially in 2.4. And the RF is mostly just sloshing up and down the hallways because it's easier to travel down a hollow tube than to propagate through walls, bathrooms, and whatnot. So it's not to say that placing APs in the hallways is not a doable or a valid option. Sometimes you have no choice. but you have to understand what your limitations are and how to best work within those limitations. This could be using directional antennas, crisscrossing the hallways to keep co-channel interference down, and pointing the RF to where your clients are, helping that RF push through the walls instead of careening down the hallways. Now, my personal preference is to place APs in rooms and use the building's infrastructure itself to provide separation between cells. This way, you are indeed placing the RF where the clients are and can get the most channel reuse possible. The downside is it may require more APs than a hallway design would, and could provide substantially better user experience. I made a video showing how RF signals propagate when APs are placed in the halls versus how it propagates when placed in rooms. You can see that in the show notes. Until next time, this is Eddie Forero with your Bad 5 Minute. Well, a few minutes anyway.
Wireless LAN terminology. Do you know what this word means?
Multiple channel architecture. What is it? It's a WLAN architecture where 3 or more channels are used in a tiled pattern within a frequency band, 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, for the purpose of minimizing co-channel and adjacent channel interference. This is often referred to as channel reuse or microcell architecture. More non-overlapping channels in the reuse pattern are used for higher capacity.
This has been episode 102 of Wireless LAN Professionals podcast. We had a couple sections. We had a little bit on Wi-Fi question of the day from Lee Badman, followed by an interview with Jerry Olla on SDR radio. And we ended up with a 10 Talk off of the Wireless LAN Professionals 10 Talk series, as well as a little teeny bit of a bad 5 from Eddie Forero. So thanks to all those who contributed on the show. If you have any feedback or ideas, go ahead and put them in the show notes at wirelesslandprofessionals.com. Glad to have you involved, and we'll see you in the next episode next week.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Wireless LAN Pros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter at Keith R. Parsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.